Metro 2035, Dmitry Glukhovsky, Chapter 13, Living Space. He thought the day would come after he had worked through the night, but here there was neither night nor day, and there was only one shift, from the beginning to the end. They gave them water from a hose, counting the swallows. Saving water wasn't allowed. There weren't any privies. All the tunnels apart from one were completely blocked off with barbed wire, intertwined like cobwebs. It was impossible to run. There was nowhere even to crawl. The beast people crapped where they stood without interrupting their work. Men in front of women and women in front of men. New arrivals learned to do this during their first day. They were taught with barbed wire whips. They were killed without compassion, as a matter of course. The ones who didn't want to work, the ones who were dying anyway and couldn't work, and the ones who tried to be cunning and pretended to be dead already. Workers weren't spared. New ones were brought twice a day. They had to eat too, and the amount of food wasn't increased. Every time the iron door opened and the dumbfounded new arrivals were dragged and shoved into the boundless cave of Schiller Station, Artyom's guts twisted. Now Dietmar would come in. Artyom's deception would be discovered at any moment. The Reds would send soldiers to Teatralnaya from Okhotny Riyadh through the demolished hermetic gates and the upper vestibule. The Blitzkrieg would turn into a war of position, and Dietmar would come back to hang Artyom for treachery. When would he come? Soon. They felt Artyom's body, determined that he still had a lot of strength in him, and gave him a barrow to push. He had to collect from the bearded scrabblers everything that they had scraped and broken off, fling it into the barrow, and transport it into an open tunnel, which led to Kuznetsky Most. A flooring of planks had been laid over the sleepers. He could run something like 300 meters along it, and then dump the earth and stone on a heap that already rose right up to the ceiling. Artyom had a good job. He realized that immediately. They didn't hobble his feet, and he wasn't made to stand till in one spot. He had to walk round the others, looking to see who had accumulated the most soil and rock. Unfortunately, there was nowhere to run, but on the other hand, he did manage to find Homer. The old man had only spent half a day here, and he was still clothed, but he had already understood what he was allowed to do and what he wasn't. He couldn't slack off or shirk. He couldn't look into anyone's eyes, no matter who he was talking to. But if you spoke to someone without looking at them, that was forgiven. In this factory of bodies and earth, it was impossible to hear anything more than one step away in any case. Homer might be old, but he was bearing up. He wasn't groaning and he wasn't weeping. He struck intently at the ground, not quickly and not slowly, but in no hurry to exhaust his strength. He was soaking wet and smeared with earth. His shoulders were ripped open and stained reddish-brown, and his lips were bitten. "I came to get you, Nikolai Ivanovich," Artyom said, looking past Homer. "And now we'll probably both end up staying here." "Thanks, you shouldn't have bothered," Homer gasped back in time with his blows. "That two-faced, bastard, scumbag, won't let anyone out. We'll get out of here somehow," Artyom promised him. Their conversation proceeded scrappily. Artyom couldn't keep going back to the same corner too often. The overseers spotted that sort of thing and lashed people with their whips for it. The whips were springy steel wire, with barbs protruding from them in all directions. Some bit into the flesh when they struck, others when they were tugged away. "How about you? Were you at Teatralnaya?" "I was." "Did you see Umbach?" The Reds arrested him. Someone ratted, because he listened to the radio. They took him and shot him. In front of me. I didn't get a chance to talk. A pity, really, a good man. He collected Homer's lumps of stone. Then he took a mound of earth from a hunchback at the other end of the station. Then he helped a woman with flabby breasts get up before the overseer could spot her through the stone mist. Then he went back to Homer. Umbach wasn't alone. Others had been in touch. People came to Moscow from a different city, from Polar Dawns, probably. People. Right, people, you say. Where are they? I didn't meet any. The Reds find everyone and waste them. Shoot them. Send them to the Lubyanka, to the KGB. The ones who come, the ones who see them, and the ones who hear about them. Maybe. They're afraid. They'll help Hansa. Against them. Artyom took a new load of stones from Homer. Then he ran over to a young guy who was slow, lopsided, and short of fingers to collect up his scrapings. And then to a skinny Caucasian type who who had flung together an entire mountain in his vicious determination not to croak. Through the haze, Artyom thought he saw something familiar, but he didn't have any reason to go closer. "So do you believe me? I told Miller. Miller doesn't believe it. He says it's crazy nonsense." "I heard. Umbach myself, I believe him. I don't understand it, but I believe him." "Thanks, Granddad, thank you." "Or it's spies. Someone's agents, eh?" "I don't know." He cleaned everything up and ran on. Someone waved to him. "Come and take my load." An unexpected joy. It was Lyoka, the broker. Exhausted and flogged, but smiling. "So you've joined us too? You alive?" And Artyom smiled at him sincerely, feeling a little better. "I'm too valuable an employee to be made redundant," the broker croaked. "So it didn't work out with the Legion?" "No, it didn't." Glancing round, stealthily, Lyoka helped Artyom tip earth into the trolley. "Probably just not my thing. No getting away from your true calling." He nodded at the dried-up heaps. An overseer darted over and lashed Artyom and Lyoka for talking. Artyom pulled his head down into this shoulders to protect it. He ran into the tunnel, tipped out the barrow, came back and looked around. A guard called him over to the woman that Artyom had lifted up of the floor so that she would live a little bit longer. But she had only held up for a little while and then fallen again. They shone a torch in her eyes, but she still saw nothing but darkness. One guard moved Artyom aside with his automatic rifle. Another took a firm grip on a steel reinforcement bar, took aim, and split the woman's head open, smashing it like an egg. Artyom forgot about the automatic and darted forward, taking the reinforcing bar across his shoulder, the gun butt to his chin, and the kicks from boots when he fell. A damp iron gun barrel was stuck in his mouth, and its foresight scraped his palate. "Want to try that again, bastard? Do you? Get up!" They stood him on his feet and dumped that woman in his barrow. "Take her." "Where to?" They smacked him round the back of his head and sent her off on her final journey. The dead went to the same place as the rocks and soil. The woman was uncomfortable in the barrow. Her legs dangled out and her broken head lolled to one side. Just hang on for a moment. The first time round they had showed him what to do with cases like this. The dead had to be taken along the planking floor to the mountain of earth blocking off the tunnel to Kuznetsky Most, and then dumped on a mound there, along with the rocks and stones. The mound sometimes slipped down, clothing the naked bodies, filling their mouths and ears with clay and sand. This was their funeral. After that, Artyom didn't try to approach Homer or Lyoka. The overseers had spotted him. Instead of Homer, there were various others who were still strong and some who were already exhausted. Kyrgyzs and Russians, Russians and Azerbaijanis, Azerbaijanis and Tajiks. They all gave Artyom their stones, and they all took his strength. Soon the minute that he took to load the barrow was no longer enough for his legs to rest, and the minute when he ran with the barrow was no longer enough for his arms to recover. He kept looking round when the door creaked. Was it Dietmar? Had he come for Artyom? He stuck it out until he started to fall. Then he went back to his old man. Homer was waiting for him, completely exhausted too. Why? The Reds. Why doesn't anyone know but them? Maybe they don't let anyone find out? Do you think they're in contact with Dawns? And they're keeping it secret? They're lying. To Dawns. Holding. Talks. Huh? Talks about what? God only knows what the Reds want. They've got famine. The mushrooms are rotting. Maybe they want food supplies, eh? If so, the earth there is fertile. Sure. Pull the other one. An overseer walked past and whistled. You and you and you and you, eat quickly, it's your turn. They brought a trough of swill and told them to scoop it up with their hands. Artyom couldn't even bear the smell of it, although the others champed and slurped for as long as they could. But at least Homer was fed on this shift, so they had 10 minutes without a pick and a barrow. I've been up on top. So far I've walked along Tverskaya Street to Teatralnaya, and up there, someone's hunting everyone who walks along Tverskaya Street with a genuine armored car and a motorbike. They killed 4 of their stalkers, and they were going to finish me. For some reason, they didn't touch me, but they found me quickly. Homer shrugged. Then he folded his fingers into a cup, scooped up some gruel, sniffed it, and thought, and then I walked back, and there was no one there. I got to Paulus, without a suit, not dressed. And you know what? I got caught in the rain. In the rain? The old man asked, looking up. In the rain, Artyom chuckled. On all sides, people jostled and pushed their way through to the trough like swine. Artyom didn't see it. Instead, he saw tall, slim people in wide-brimmed hats. He saw rain falling from a cloudless sky and those slow-flying machines again. What an idiot, he said to himself. Just imagine it. Walking along in the rain and imagining something like that. Like an airship or something, only with transparent wings. Like flies have, only big ones. Like dragonflies. And all in such bright, festive colors. And the rain as well. I dreamed it. He lowered his voice in embarrassment. The beast people were eating. He mustn't distract them with nonsense like this. But the beast people couldn't give a shit for Artyom's dreams. Their trough was getting shallower, and they still had to live here for some time yet. And without the slops, there was absolutely no way they could possibly do that. But Homer was listening and not eating. But those carriages, the little ones, he coughed to clear his throat. Instead of cars, on the roads. Yes, Artyom confirmed, perplexed. With 4 places. Did you see them? Did you see that? Up there, on the surface? I saw it. As if I was remembering a dream, but how do you know? That's out of my book, out of the notebook. It's written in the notebook. Homer screwed his eyes up, examining Artyom and blinking, trying to understand if this was some kind of mockery. Did you take it? My notebook? And read it? When? I didn't take it. And where is it, anyway? They confiscated it. Immediately. That Dietmar, my documents, the notebook, everything. But what do you mean you didn't read it? How else could you know? I told you it was a dream. It's not your dream, Artyom. It isn't even a dream. What? I told you about that girl, about Sasha, the one from Tula. She was drowned at a flooded station. Something, yes. I remember something. When we got addled at Svetnoy Boulevard. Yes, that's Sasha. It's hers. That's the way she pictured the world up on the surface. She was born in the metro. She'd never been up on top. So that was her own naive way? Sasha, with white hair, you said? Artyom's head started spinning, and the world swayed as if it was caught in a wave of hot air. He rubbed his temples. His head was splitting. Eat. Why aren't you eating? A man with a swollen belly told him wearily as he dropped back from the trough. His beard was matted and there was dark water streaming down it. Enough of that idle chatter. They only feed us once a day. He strained and gave a long, drawn-out fart. Then he lay down on his back and started staring up at the ceiling. He'd done what he could to save Artyom, but Artyom couldn't even glance into that trough today. He felt sick immediately. With white hair, she's about 18. How do you know? How do you know? Homer stood up too, with his hands on his waist. I don't understand. I don't remember how, where from, but I saw all of it myself. I can picture it to myself, with my own eyes. Artyom raised his hand as if he wanted to catch a toy plane flying past him. You took it, my notebook. You took it, the old man said angrily, absolutely convinced. It couldn't be anything else. Why are you lying to me now? I didn't take your fucking notebook, Artyom yelled furiously. What the hell would I want with you and your damn chronicles? You're making fun of me, right? You asshole! Artyom grabbed hold of his barrow without even waiting for the whistle. Afterwards, he regretted it, while there was still time to regret it. But then routine took over, things grew together. Load, run, unload. Stone, earth, a dead body. One thing on top of another, one thing underneath another. His arms and legs first caught fire and then fell silent. Then turned weak and came to a halt. Then more life appeared in them from somewhere deep down on the bottom, and now through the dull, aching pain, they jerked, lifted, lowered, walked, and dragged the time along. He started falling asleep as he moved. He hadn't slept for 24 hours, and they roused him with steel thorns. He tried to help those who fell, and they drove him away with chains. He stopped turning round and reacting when the door rumbled. He had already forgotten about Dietmar. He didn't want to know about him. He didn't want to hear the whining, miserable beast people, to hear their stories about how they had ended up in here, who was punished for what kind of deformity. Some of them only mumbled anyway, not to Artyom. but to everybody there, so that everybody there would know a little bit about them and remember them when they died here and were covered over by the advancing bank of earth. And he had no more wits left to construct lines and chains from the shot radio operator to the KGB man Svinolop, from the loose-mouthed Zuev to the Lubyanka, from Miller to some Besolov or other, from Besolov to the Führer, from the Führer to Dietmar. None of this came together. None of it made any kind of meaning. Instead of connections drawn in by an invisible pencil, instead of a dusty slaughterhouse, instead of troughs filled with slops, Artyom summoned the slow-moving planes into the concrete air and built houses reaching up to the sky in the cave. Those planes allowed him to wait for the lights out signal. They evacuated him into the world that the drowned girl had imagined for herself, but no. He had seen it all for himself, definitely, with his own eyes. But when? How? The signal for lights out came after all. They were prodded into the corner and heaped up onto each other. Artyom fell asleep, expecting to see that city. Sasha's city. But he saw cells. Svinolop arisen from his ashes, and himself fleeing. Only in the dream he didn't run along a straight corridor to freedom, but through an enchanted maze that had no exit. And after that the dream ended, and the whistle of the new shift sounded. It was still day, or was it night? 24 hours during which Artyom had learned to slurp the swill together with everyone without getting sick. During which he hadn't gone over first to the old man when he was hurt. During which he had stopped counting the barrows of earth and the barrows with dead bodies. His clothes were all ripped and tattered by barbed wire. The scratches from the thorns constantly oozed a red liquid, and the liquid kept getting more and more transparent, more and more futile and useless. The group A, rhesus negative, flowed out like diluted compote. There was no one to compensate for it, to fill Artyom up with fluid of his own. Letyaga had obviously gone on standing there, catching those spots of light on his hands, until he turned away and went tramping back. He couldn't do anything without orders. And there could only be one order about Artyom from Miller. Scratch him off the list, and Dietmar hadn't come for him, hadn't taken him off to be hanged. He was busy at the front. Artyom had neither rescue nor execution coming to him. Then he ran through another day and night. He took away Homer's stones without speaking, and Homer let him have them without speaking. Nikolai Ivanovich looked bad. He had turned yellow and was swaying on his feet. Artyom would have felt sorry for him, but the old man wouldn't allow it. He was offended about the Chronicle, and because Artyom had given him hope. He forced himself to talk with the exhausted Lyokha. How were they building this vast hall? Who was directing the workers? Who told them to take the tunnel liners apart? Lyokha pointed to a slant-eyed individual. That's Farouk. He built Moscow City. He has his own people, Abdurrahim and Ali, and they've been trusted with the job. They couldn't find any other specialists. Farouk strode around everywhere with his assistants, and with no shackles, full of himself. But he too scooped the swill out of the common trough with his own hands. He guided the construction work confidently, deciding who should dig, who should mix cement, who should put up props. We've got to escape, Artyom told the broker. Otherwise we'll croak. Croaking is the surest way to escape from here, the broker said with a feeble smile. Well, you go first then. Artyom laughed with half his face, to scout out the way. On the fourth day, Dietmar still didn't come, and Letyaga didn't come either, and Artyom had no strength left even to think about escaping. But he definitely wanted to keep on living for a while, and the desire became more desperate with every hour. Not in order to get his business done, take revenge, find out the truth, and see his nearest and dearest, but simply to live for a little while. For this, Artyom learned not to acquire fresh wounds from the barbed wire. The repulsive taste of the swill made him feel sick to the stomach, but he forced himself to keep going back to the trough in order to draw at least a little bit of strength from it. He learned how to work so that he didn't see anything around him apart from the dragonfly airplanes. But his blindness came at a price. When people lying beside you have their heads broken open and you say nothing, then what is left unsaid accumulates, turns sour and rots. When they lashed him with the metal thorns, the purulence in his soul flowed out together with the pain and the blood. But when his wounds began drying up and growing over with scabs, Artyom started fermenting on the inside. Lights out sounded, but he couldn't get to sleep. He tossed and turned, scratching at his scabs, opening them up. Scabs, and the sleeplessness, and the sweltering heat, and the excessive corporeal closeness with other people, like being in a ditch with dead bodies, set him drifting. Who was it that had spoken to him about scabs? Who had wanted to wash those scabs off him? His head was lying on some woman's knees. See how this person is overgrown with some kind of scabs, isn't he? Better be gentle with him, baby. Everything was blurred, as if he was looking through dirty polythene. But no, it wasn't a dream. It was true. His head really was lying on her knees. The girl's knees. He looked up into her eyes, and she looked down at him, leaning over. From below her breasts looked like white little half-moons. She was naked, and Artyom was naked. He turned his head and kissed her on her soft, hollow stomach. There were crimson marks there, like dots, cigarette burns, old ones, the traces of lazy torture. He kissed her on that burn. That spot was more tender, more vulnerable. Thank you, Sasha. She touched his hair with her fingers and moved her hand, stroking. And the hair was soft, but as soon as her fingers moved on, it straightened up stubbornly. Her smile was abstracted. Everything was drifting. Close your eyes. Do you know how I used to imagine the world up on the surface? On the next shift, Artyom kept looking round to see when Homer would finally accumulate enough stone. He couldn't wait to tell him, to share this with him, bring him this joy, and to justify himself. But the old man worked very slowly, as if he was in no hurry at all. He had become scraggy, and his skin hung loose on him. The gaze of his eyes wandered. Homer struck at the wall sparingly. The pieces that broke off it were small, and mostly he just left scratches on it. And then, before he'd gathered enough stone, he suddenly sat down on the ground. He leaned back against the wall, stretched out his legs, and closed his eyes. Artyom noticed first, before the overseers, and he tossed a stone at Lyokha. Distract them. He loaded the dried-out old man in his barrow and trundled him off towards the tunnel, as if to bury him, but dumped him with the sleepers. Then he took a dose of the whip for walking along with an empty barrow, but not for the old man. Artyom asked God not to write the old man off yet. He had asked for a lot this last week. How could he pay everything back? But this time he was allowed to extend his credit. Homer didn't die. He woke up at the whistle along with the other shift. Artyom managed to meet him at the trough. He was impatient to talk to him. Listen, Granddad, I've remembered where those planes got into my head. Eh? The old man was still stunned. That time on Tsvetnoy Boulevard, when you got me drunk, I think I saw her, right there in front of my eyes, you know. It's kind of vague. Only, you won't be angry with me, will you? You saw her? I saw her. There, at Tsvetnoy. It was her who told me everything. Your notebook had nothing to do with it. Honestly. She was at Tsvetnoy. What was she? A girl with white hair, frail, Sashenka. You're not lying now, are you? The old man's voice had turned weak. He wanted to believe Artyom. He was trying. I'm not lying. I'm not mocking you, Artyom replied firmly. Alive, but you ate that garbage there. It gives you all sorts of... I saw her. I talked to her. I remember it. I've just remembered. Wait, Sasha, my Sasha, in that hellhole in a whorehouse? What was she doing? Did you see what she was doing? Nothing, Granddad. She was just fine. A week ago, she was alive. But how did she get out? How is she? I got them from her, those pictures, the planes and the rain. She said, close your eyes and imagine. But in a whorehouse. Why was she in a whorehouse? Calm down, Granddad. You mustn't get so upset. She's in a whorehouse, but just look where the two of us are. See, perhaps a whorehouse isn't the worst place to be. We have to get her out. We've got to get her out of that place. We'll do that, Granddad. We'll definitely get her out. If only someone gets us out. Sit down. What have you jumped up for? Sasha had given Homer strength, and hope had deceived his body. But the deception didn't last for long. The old man waved his pick feebly, and he wasn't the one controlling his tool now. It was controlling Homer, setting him swaying. He and Artyom never had anywhere to escape to from the station anyway, but now it was just impossible. Asking the guards to spare Homer would have been to condemn him to immediate death. There was only one thing delaying the execution. The arrival of new workers had been disrupted, and the overseers had become more condescending to the old ones. And so Homer held out for another day. Then they came for him. "Nikolaev!" someone shouted through a megaphone from the door. "Nikolai Nikolaev!" Homer pulled his head down into his shoulders and started striking more rapidly with the pick in order to grind out his norm before he was shot. Artyom crept towards the door with his barrow to scout things out. Standing there in the doorway, backed up by men with automatic rifles and gazing round with an air of fright and revulsion, was the teacher, Ilya Stepanovich, looking a bit puffy-faced but unhurt and in uniform. He raised the megaphone to his beard and called again, "Nikolaev! Homer!" Then the guard remembered, took a closer look, and dragged the old man over to Ilya Stepanovich. The teacher walked down one step and then a second. He mumbled something into the old man's dirty ear, wincing at the stink. Homer didn't look at him, but down at the floor. Artyom received a lash of the whip for his pensive pause and curiosity and had to move on. Ilya Stepanovich stood there for a while, then gestured despairingly at Nikolai Nikolaev with his clean hand, and left. "What did he want?" Artyom asked the old man, seizing his moment at the trough. "He wanted to take me out. He sat down to write his book, but it won't come. They gave him everything he needs. A separate study, special rations, but no. He says he's read my notebook, and he wants me to help him, give him pointers. He'll get me out of here for good." "Go on, agree." "Agree to what? To write his book? What difference does that make to you? You'll croak in here. Write him a book about the glory of the Reich in my own words? This way there won't be any kind of book. You'll be gone and there'll be nothing left after you." Homer sucked in his gruel and swallowed. The taste was all right, more or less like life. "I told him I won't go without you." "Yes, you will, Granddad. Go!" "He can't do that. He only got permission for one man to help. He says they won't let him have two. But what about Dietmar?" "Dietmar's been killed. At Teatralnaya. The Reds broke through somehow and killed him, and lots of others, too, that very day. Now the teacher works directly for the Führer. He liked the little idea of a book." "Dietmar's been killed. Artyom was suddenly suspended in the void of a tunnel. Now there was no one here who knew him or remembered him. He wasn't a hostage, a prisoner, or a double agent any longer. He was a nameless freak, a disposable slave. There was no point in waiting for anything any longer. Nothing left to be afraid of, no straws to clutch at. He was lost here in this boundless living space, and there was no one to look for him. He'd taken all the strength out of himself and put it into the tunnel. The tunnel was stuffed full of Artyom's strength, like a length of gut, but Artyom's energy was dwindling. He was getting weak. He couldn't eat a thing. He had a rusty taste in his mouth and a ringing sound in his ears. A man, damn the bastard, was an exhaustible resource. And now it looked like the end of Artyom's tunnel was looming into view. "Go on, Granddad. Go anyway." "How can I leave you? You came here to get me. This way at least there's some hope. They don't need me anymore. But now they do need at least one of us. If you die, then I'll die too, that's for sure. Ask them to bring the teacher back, and go with him." "I can't do that." "Then how are you going to get that girl of yours out if you kick the bucket? I'm sorry, but you don't have much time left. You can barely stay on your feet." "Well, I can't." But that night, before lights out, after they had trundled away the man with the swollen goiter who worked next to Homer in order to pile up stones over him, the old man finally scraped together enough fragments for Artyom to go over to him. "If I agreed, then I could get fixed up there somehow and then try to rescue you too, couldn't I?" "Of course," said Artyom. "That's what I've been talking about." "You think I should ask?" "Ask. But will you hold out? How long can you hold out?" "As long as I have to, Granddad," Artyom promised as convincingly as he could. "You wait here. I'll go and get the guard." After that, while they were waiting for the teacher, the overseers were wary of crippling Homer now, and a little of his immunity had rubbed off on Artyom. They had time to say a few more things to each other. "It's good you're getting out, Granddad. It's good that you're going to write. You probably won't just write his book. You'll carry on with your own, too, right?" "I don't know." "You will, for sure. It's right that people should leave something behind them in this world. That was a good idea of yours. Drop that. No, listen, I can't tell you everything here now. I just wanted to tell you about the Dark Ones, the most important things. You were going to write about them in your book, weren't you? What about them? The Dark Ones, Granddad. They weren't what we thought. They weren't demons. They weren't a threat to everything. They were our only salvation. And another thing, I was the one who opened the gates into the metro for them. I was still little then. There was this one day from my childhood that I just couldn't forget. And so, when he goaded Vitalik and Zhenka, two other kids just like him, into playing at stalkers and going to visit the abandoned botanical gardens, even though children were strictly forbidden even to set foot in the tunnels. And when he turned the handle of the locking screw on the hermetic door, opening the way up to the surface, and when he went first, dashing up the collapsed steps of the escalator, how could he explain it? It was because he wanted to see his mother, the mother from that day with the ducks and the ice cream. He was on his way to meet her because he had missed her so badly. The others had trudged up, following Artyom's lead simply because it was frightening to be alone, and the Dark Ones didn't see him from the outside. They saw him immediately from the inside, a solitary orphan who had gotten lost in their world. They saw him and made him their pet. No, they didn't tame him. They adopted him. But he thought they had tamed him. He was afraid that they would put him on a chain, that they would teach him to obey commands, and they would use him against people. He was afraid they wanted to be his masters, but they didn't want that. They simply felt sorry for him, and in their pity, they took care of him. And with the same compassion, they were willing to save all the people under the ground. But the people had become too brutalized already. The Dark Ones needed an intermediary, an interpreter, and Artyom had been picked up and adopted by them. He could sense their language, could have learned to translate it into Russian. That was his mission in life, to be a bridge between the new man and the old man. But Artyom took fright. He was afraid to trust. He was afraid of the voice in his head, the dreams, the images. He didn't trust them, he didn't trust himself, and he turned to a different mission, to find a way of wiping out the Dark Ones, only because he was afraid of letting them inside himself, of listening to them and doing what they said. It was easier to find some missiles that hadn't been used in the war and exterminate every last one of the Dark Ones, to cauterize the spot where a new, rational human being had appeared with a bright orange flame. The botanical gardens, the very place where Artyom had walked hand in hand with his mother as a 4-year-old. Before Artyom allowed the missiles to be launched, before he gave Miller the coordinates, he still had 1 second. And for that second, he let the Dark Ones inside himself after all. And then, not in order to save themselves, but out of pity for him, knowing that Artyom wouldn't cancel their execution in any case, the last thing they showed him was his mother, her smiling face. They told him in her voice that they loved him and forgave him. He could still have put everything right then. Stopped Miller, cut off the radio set, but he felt afraid again. And when the missiles started falling, there was no one to love Artyom anymore. And there was no one he could ask for forgiveness. And his mother's face disappeared forever. And the botanical gardens became molten asphalt and black charcoal, square kilometers of black charcoal and soot. There was nowhere for Artyom to go back to. He walked down the Ostankino Tower and went home to Exhibition Station. He was greeted as a hero, as a savior, as a saint who had conquered a monstrous dragon. But he carried on being afraid, if not of going insane, then of becoming known as a madman. And he didn't tell anyone, apart from his Anya and Miller, what had really happened up there. He didn't tell anyone else that he might have destroyed mankind's last chance of reclaiming the earth. He confessed to 2 people, and neither of them believed him. And it was only afterwards, a year later, that he started remembering. While he and Ulman were uncoiling the aerial on the Ostankino Tower, something else seemed to flicker in the radio set before Miller came on. There was some kind of call sign, but Artyom didn't have the headphones. He could have imagined it, but if he just imagined it, then there was no hope. It was all irreparable, irrecoverable. With those clumsy fingers of his, slimy from mushrooms, He had strangled the only hope left for himself and everyone else. He did it. Artyom had condemned the people at the station and throughout the metro to life in prison, them and their children, and their children's children. But if there was at least just one place in the world where people had survived. Just one. Nikolaev, go, come on, I'll see you to the door. Maybe they won't send me packing. Is it all true? Homer held on to Artyom's arm as if Artyom was helping the old man along. But in fact, it was the old man who was helping Artyom. Yes, I told you as quickly as I could to get it all said in time. When I get you out of here, you'll tell me the whole story, right? With all the details? Homer glanced into his eyes. So that it's all there in the book, so that nothing gets confused. Of course. When you get me out. But that's the most important part. I just wanted to tell you, do you believe me? Yes. And you'll write it all down like that? Yes, I'll write it like that. Good, said Artyom. That's right. Ilya Stepanovich was standing there impatiently, examining the beast people. Maybe he was wondering what was the best way to keep them out of his textbook. He was glad to see Homer and smiled as he laid a padded jacket across his shoulders. The old man held out his hand to Artyom in farewell. Till the next time, then? The teacher's face twitched. He knew there wouldn't be any next time, but he didn't want to argue with Homer. Artyom knew too, and he didn't want to argue either. Ilya Stepanik! He called to the teacher as he led the old man away to live. The teacher looked back over his shoulder reluctantly. The guards came to life and raised their barbed wire whips above Artyom. How's your wife? Did she have the baby? Artyom asked, speaking clearly. Is it a boy or a girl? Ilya Stepanovich's face turned gray, and he aged instantly. A stillborn girl, he said soundlessly, but Artyom understood anyway from his lips. The door slammed shut, and a whip stung Artyom sweetly across the shoulders. The blood started. Good, let it flow. Let everything inside come out. When they served the slops, Artyom didn't simply eat. He ate in memory of Dietmar. It was good that he had seen the old man out. It was good that he had convinced the old man that he could get Artyom out of here. It was good that he hadn't allowed himself to be convinced. At least he didn't twitch anymore when the door clanged. He didn't hope for anything. He didn't count the days. It was easier that way, outside of time. And it was good, too, that he'd been able to tell Homer the most important thing about himself and the Dark Ones. That he'd had enough minutes and enough breath to do it. Now it wasn't so terrifying to be left here, forgotten. Something was happening out there, at the other stations. Maybe war, but it didn't affect Schiller Station at all. Everything here carried on as usual. Living space ate away at the ground, the tunnel to Kuznetsky. Most was fed earth and human beings and kept creeping closer and closer to the station. Artyom was getting weaker, but he was still trying to live. Lyoka the broker was like a walking skeleton now, but was still stubbornly trying to outlast Artyom. They didn't talk to each other any longer. There was nothing left to talk about. There were some men who tried to escape, who attacked the barbed wire and the guards with their picks. They were all shot, together with a few randomly chosen others, to put a fright into everyone. After that, they were all afraid of trying to escape. They were afraid to talk about it. They were even afraid to think about it. Artyom kept himself to himself. After lights out, as he arranged himself on someone else's body in the sleeping trench, he locked his eyes shut and imagined that his head was lying on the knees of that lovely naked girl, Sasha, and he stroked his own hair, not feeling the weight of his own hand. He imagined her showing him the city up on the surface. Without Sasha, he'd have had no choice but to croak. After sleeping the regulation 4 hours, he got up and ran and lifted and tossed and trundled and dumped, and walked and crawled and fell, and got up again. How many days? How many nights? He didn't know. The barrow was only half full now. He couldn't cart away more than that. It was a good thing the freaks had been cut down to half their weight by the atrocious food, or he couldn't have lifted them and buried them. In the afternoons, he also had a secret amusement. Artyom knew that no one had battered that wall over there because the passage with the social housing lay just on the other side of it. He had calculated where Ilya Stepanovich and Narin's cozy little apartment was located. Once a day, Artyom glanced round furtively and ran over to that wall and knocked on it. Rat-a-tat-tat. The guards didn't hear it. Ilya Stepanovich didn't hear it. Artyom himself didn't hear the knocking. But even so, every time he split his sides in paroxysms of wild, soundless laughter. But then, in the middle of eternity, when they had already stopped waiting for it, deliverance arrived. A terrible deliverance. The war butted its way through into their little world. The door slammed rapidly again and again, and Schiller Station was filled with well-fed men in the uniform of the Iron Legion. The freaks and beast people stopped pottering about and froze, gaping obtusely at their visitors. With their numbed brains working reluctantly, they began assembling the words dropped by the new arrivals into a mosaic. "The Reds have taken Kuznetsky Most! They've deployed troops from the Lubyanka! They'll break through this way! Any moment now, orders are to block off the tunnel." Where are the demolition men? What's holding up the demolition men? "The tunnel to Kuznetsky. Most has to be mined, as far as possible from the station." Where are the explosives? Where are the demolition men? "They're coming. Almost here already. The vanguard, they're machine gunners. Come on, move it. Cut it. Cut the cable. Lay the mines as far as possible from the station. Farther on, now!" Sweaty demolition men came running in, dragging heavy crates of explosives. The beast people still didn't understand anything. Artyom watched the fuss through his usual scraped, perspiring polythene. None of this seemed to concern him. "We don't have enough time. Too close. We have to gain more time somehow. Time! What can we do? How? They'll be here soon. Superior forces. We'll lose the station. It mustn't happen." Then someone was inspired. "Drive the freaks out into the tunnel." "What? The freaks! Put them in the tunnel. They'll take the brunt of it with their picks and their spades. They'll delay the Reds, and while they're being hacked down, we'll have time to lay the mines. They won't fight. Look at them. A blocking detachment, then. We'll drive them in. Solovyov. Borman, Fang, drive them in. Come on. Every second counts, you shit-eaters. Move it." The guards started whistling their whips and chains through the air, tearing away the diggers clinging to the walls who had turned to stone, herding them together and channeling them into the mouth of the tunnel. Only a moment ago, there was an insuperable barrier here. 3 layers of barbed wire. But now the cobweb was dangling down in untidy clumps, and there turned out to be a tunnel behind it, with another set of tracks to Kuznetsky Most. And somewhere deep in that tunnel, something bad was brewing. The stupefied beast people trudged into the tunnel, gazing round in helpless confusion at the overseers. What did they want from them? Each of them was holding the tool that he always worked with. The pick workers had picks, the hammer workers had hammers. Artyom would have gone in with his barrow, but it got in other people's way, jabbing at them below the knees, and it didn't know how to move over the sleepers, so Artyom was ordered to abandon it. He left it behind and walked on empty-handed. His hands felt awkward. They wanted a tool to hold. His fingers were stiff, curved, and calloused now, so that the handles of a barrow or the haft of a spade fitted into them neatly. The ones shambling at the back were lashed and squeezed in by men with automatics. The men with automatics were followed by sappers dragging crates and unreeling cables. "Where are we going? What for?" the naked prisoners bleated, staring into the darkness or looking round at the torches and gun barrels of their escorts. But as all of them were about to be dragged into that black, gaping hole straight ahead, the echoes of a distant hurrah came seeping out of it, together with the fine trickles of water alongside the rails. "What? What's that in there?" "Where are we going? Are they setting us free?" "They say they're setting us free. Someone in there said something." "Shut up. Shut up, all of you. Move. Move, you dumb brutes." Ooh. Did you hear it? Did you hear that? We won't even get 100 meters with these creeping lice. They're barely even hobbling along. This is sabotage. Here, start laying the mines here. Drive the freaks farther in. Drive them into a bayonet charge. Hooray. We don't have time. Here, in front of these ones. The sappers halted and busied themselves with their equipment. They opened up their crates and started taking out briquettes, attaching them to the walls of the tunnel and setting them in indentations in the tunnel liners. Someone nudged Artyom in the back with a gun barrel. He started moving his feet faster, and the anxious demolition men were left behind. Whips whistled through the air, and million-watt torches shone between the figures shambling into darkness, tracing out far-reaching, hunchbacked shadows on the sleepers, and a bullhorn barked, spurring them on. "Hey you, all of you, a great deed lies ahead of you. You are destined to save the Reich. A horde of freaks is advancing against us. Red cannibals who will stop at nothing. Today, at this very moment, you can earn forgiveness. You can pay with blood for the right to call yourselves human beings. They will destroy the Reich, and then the entire metro. There is no one else to stop them now, except you. They wanted to stab us in the back, but they didn't know that you were covering our back. They are better armed, but you also have weapons. You have nothing to lose, and therefore nothing to be afraid of." "Me? Where? I won't go. I won't. I don't know how to fight." There was a loud crash. The echo of the shot swallowed the echo of the scream, and immediately, without even waiting for everyone in the herd to understand what had happened, the automatics started slamming into the backs of the dawdlers' heads. Someone let out his last breath and expired. Someone whom the blow had failed to kill howled. A woman started squealing. The man next to Artyom looked round. A bullet whistled, and he tumbled to the ground with a gurgle in his throat. "Forward, you scumbags! Don't you dare! Don't you dare try to stop! They're killing us! Don't stop! They're shooting! Run!" Artyom shoved against someone's crooked back, pushed forward through the jam, reached down, pulled a young boy out from under all the feet, immediately forgot about him, and then, constantly glancing round at his pursuers, started squeezing through towards the center, to safety. "Forward! Forward!" People fell face down on the rails, their deaths pushing the ones ahead of them in the back like dominoes. Some stumbled and others surged forward towards the vague and terrible "Hoorah!" that seethed and eddied towards them along the tunnel like groundwater that has broken through into a working mine. "We're not sheep," someone at the front roared out suddenly, one of the freaks. "We won't just give up like this. Come on, we won't surrender. Death to them. Kill them," someone else in the crowd howled. "Forward! Forward!" And slowly, like the flywheel of a locomotive or a sick man recovering consciousness, the entire long, naked crowd, the shaggy, battered beast people with their picks and hammers, began picking up speed, searching inside themselves for the strength to raise their tools above their heads so that they could kill someone before they were killed themselves. "Death to them! We won't surrender! Forward! Forward!" A minute later, everyone was running forward, roaring, shrieking, or weeping, and the shepherds with the automatics should have run too, to keep up with their excited flock, but they were too lazy and too squeamish. The torchlight from behind paled slightly. The cattle drivers fell back, reluctant to mingle with the cannon fodder. The gloom ahead was dank and murky, where the shadows of the running people merged into the darkness that was flooding towards them. Artyom still didn't have anything in his hands, but he couldn't stop any longer. Anyone who even thought he could stop in the middle of this avalanche would immediately be swept away and trampled down. Artyom drew level with Lyoka. The broker gave Artyom a wild, insane look. He didn't recognize him. Then Artyom overtook him. Hurrah! The Reds burst upon them suddenly. They broke through the pall of haze, and suddenly there they were, face to face, eye to eye with the beast people. They emerged straight out of the tunnel into hand-to-hand, forehead-to-forehead combat. Ah! Like the herd from Schiller, they didn't have any torches. They were dashing through the darkness in a frenzy at random. The beast people at the front of the herd just had time to swing back their picks. And from behind them came a massive roar. The whole earth seemed to shake. The heavy breath of the blast swept the back rows of the running herd off their feet, and the tunnel resounded with it, like the sound of a trumpet at Jericho. All the torches were extinguished in a single instant. All the automatics fell silent, and suddenly there was nothing. Nothing but blackness upon blackness, impenetrable blackness on all sides, as if the world had disappeared completely. Darkness, total, absolute, and hopeless, had exploded and drowned everything. Artyom went blind and deaf, and the people running behind him went deaf, and the people running in front of him too. Some fell, tossed and tumbled and concussed, but immediately started getting to their feet, fumbling in the darkness for their picks or hammers. Because although they didn't hear it with their ears, they could feel it with their skin and the down on their skin, the way that blind death was working at the front of the herd, feeling its way along, swinging its sickle, mowing people down. And they had to get up. They had to fend it off with their picks, or better still, take a swing and shatter its empty skull, jab the sharp point into its dry eye sockets, wrench them out, swing again from the shoulder, and strike again. No one was driving them forward any longer, but everyone strained in that direction themselves, because death was calling, because it was more terrifying to hide and wait until death found you, because they wanted to strike the first blow before they were struck. Not a single shot was fired. The Reds didn't have rifles or automatics either. They all charged into hand-to-hand combat with whatever they had managed to find, and in the pitch darkness it was impossible to tell what that was. Artyom flung his arms out wide, grabbed hold of a handle, took someone else's pick, and waded in too, drunk on the fear and the passion, straight ahead through the naked bodies, to stick his own head into the maelstrom, to make sure that in this battle he wouldn't be a blind beast, but at least a blind butcher, since there were no other choices. It was close now, the spot where they were slashing, hacking, and chopping brutally, inhumanly, not knowing who they were killing and for what, no longer crying out either death or hurrah, because they had forgotten Russian and any other language, but whooping and cackling and simply growling or howling something incoherent and meaningless. The air whistled and hummed, sliced through and through. Picks jangled when they shot past the target of flesh and struck concrete, or champed when they guessed right and sank home. A breath of rusty air wafted into Artyom's face as sharp-pointed iron hurtled past only a hand's width away. He recoiled and struck back. But at his own side or the others? And were there any of his own side here anyway? Blood smelled of rust, and the people smelled of shit. The beast people and people beasts from both sides charged towards each other, hurrying to use every last ounce of their strength to kill each other and at least put an end to everything that way, to stop being afraid. Artyom swung once, twice, again and again, and several times he found someone. A squelching sound and a spurt of something hot. The pick got stuck and pulled him downwards, saving him. Something instantly whizzed past above him, something heavy enough to split his head open, but it missed. Then something exploded in his knee, and he was flung down onto the rails. He couldn't stand any longer, and he crawled and tried to hide in something soft, but the softness lashed out and shoved him away for as long as it could, snarling unintelligibly, polluting him with something sticky and hot. An infinity of time passed, but it didn't get any lighter, and the people were still hammering at each other. Wherever they heard crying or groaning, they lashed out wildly, sounding the alarm on the rails when they missed. Artyom listened to the chiming, crossed himself quietly, and didn't let a single sound out of his throat. He lay down with the back of his head on someone dead, pretending that Sasha had put his head on her knees. He pulled another body over himself and hid in it. A lot more time passed before everything went quiet. They only stopped killing when no one could stand any longer. And then the ones who weren't dead yet started moving and learning to speak again. Clutching his mutilated knee, Artyom lifted his head off Sasha's knees and sat up. He whispered, "No more, no more, no more. I don't want any more. I'm not going to kill anybody else. Who are you?" He reached out around himself with his fingers. "Who's here? Are you from Schiller?" "I'm from Schiller," someone said somewhere. "We're from the Lubyanka," someone close by answered. "The Lubyanka? Are you fascists? The Iron Legion? Cannibals?" "We're from Schiller Station," said Artyom. "We're freaks, prisoners. They drove us on ahead of them, with a blocking detachment." "We're from the Lubyanka," the voice repeated. "We're prisoners, political. They moved us to the front, at Pushkin, like cannon fodder, ahead of the real units, against the gun emplacements, so we could... They threw us forward as cannon fodder, so we could... Artyom echoed. "We're freaks." "Everyone here's from the Lubyanka, from the cells, all prisoners," someone told him. "The blocking detachment fired at our backs. The Chekists fired at our backs to make us... Us too. They fired at us. The guards. They didn't come after us. The blocking detachment stayed behind. They blew up the tunnel behind us. There's no way back there. We've got nowhere to go. They didn't come after us. They abandoned us. Why did you do it? Why did you do this to us? Why did you do this to us? What for, huh? Someone struggled painfully towards Artyom's voice, crawling like a worm on their broken legs. He heard it, but he couldn't strike another blow. It was difficult for the man to move towards Artyom, and Artyom moved towards him too. He reached out his hand, entwined his fingers with the other man's, and dragged the man towards himself. "Oh God, why did you do this to us? Forgive us, oh God, forgive us!" And they huddled up against each other. Artyom hugged him. He thought it was a grown man, and their foreheads touched. The man sobbed and shuddered, and Artyom was convulsed by a sudden spasm, too. When it shook him, the tears started flowing. When the man had cried his heart out, he heaved a sigh and died. And then Artyom released him, too. He lay there for a while. A spring in his mind clicked, and he remembered something. "From the Lubyanka! Who else is from the Lubyanka?" Here and there, bodies came to life, trying to move their broken arms and think with their dented foreheads, grunting and raving. "Natashenka, put the kettle on, my love. I've brought a cake." "When I get back from Turkey, I'll call you straight away." "I built the Moscow city. I built it." "Why is it so dark? I'm afraid of the dark." "Turn the light on. Seryoshka." "Good grief, Granny. What are you doing here? What have you come for?" "We're going to expand the living space, so there'll be enough room for everyone. Give me some water. Give me some water. Alyanka, Alyanka, you naughty girl. I am from the Lubyanka, I am." Artyom crawled on one knee and 2 elbows towards the spot where the confession had come from. Who? Tell me, don't be afraid. You, where are you? Who are you?" It was a woman. "Zuev. Was Zuev there with you?" "What Zuev? There wasn't any—" "Zuev!" Artyom roared. "Igor Zuev! Zuev, are you alive? Zuev!" He stood up on one leg, leaned against the wall, and started skipping along blindly, holding on to the tunnel linings. "Zuev! Igor Zuev! Which person here is Igor Zuev from Okotny Riyadh, from Mark's Prospect? Who? Stop that! Stop shouting, or they'll come! They'll come!" "Why don't we go to the cinema this evening, eh? Such lovely weather. It's a shame to stay in." Igor didn't reply. Maybe that was him, lying right here. But with half his head missing, it was hard for him to talk. Or maybe the cunning devil was just keeping his head down and not saying anything. Didn't want to be found. Igor, Zuev. Who was in a cell with Zuev? The one who knows about the survivors in other cities. In Polar Dawns. The ones who came to Moscow. Who was with him? Zuev. What? He told tall stories about people who had survived in some other city. He said they came to Moscow. You've no idea how much shit just goes to waste at Schiller, guys. If only you knew. He's not here. Zuev's not here. What? Where are you? Who said that? Zuev's not here? They handed him over to Hansa. Wait, stop. Say that again. Where are you? Where are you? Fuck it. Come on, tell me. Don't hide. Why are you looking for him? A friend of yours, is he? I have to know. I have to know what he said. Who were these men? Where did they show up? Where from? Why Hansa? Those men, they're not from Polar Dawns. Polar Dawns? Fuck that. It's the Stooges who spread lies about Polar Dawns. Stooges spreading rumors. They're our men. Come back from Rokossovsky. Our shock workers. Who were sent to the construction project of the Century, to Balashika. That's where they've come back from Balashika. Wait, come on, where are you? He skipped forward, and his hand disappeared into the wall. Was this a doorway? He fell, got up, and started moving toward the voice and the straining cough. Kazan is a beautiful city. They've got a remarkable mosque there. I could get rich on that shit if I could get the contract. I'm from Kazan, and my granny's from the country. My granddad's name is Kairulin. My granny can't even speak Russian. Where are you? You, the one who was talking about the outsiders. You? Did Balashika survive? And what about Polar Dawns? Were they all killed? I don't understand. How about some milk in your tea? Who knows what survived out there? It's the Stooges that talk about Polar Dawns. A beautiful story, that. The idiots go for it. At Balashika, there's an outpost on the surface with a radio center. They can contact other cities. In case, Zuev said. What? What did Zuev say? Who's collecting Tanyusha from the kindergarten today, me or you? Get away from me, Satan. Don't touch me. Go away. Please go away. I'm not yours. They're waiting for me up in heaven. An outpost? On the surface? Who's building it? I don't understand. What radio? Where are you? Tell me. Why a radio center? They're real bastards altogether, those fascists. Torturing people for nothing. And they don't even take the shit into account. The Reds. The Red Line's building. Up on the surface, in Balashika, a secret base, a station, and an outpost. So that instead of the metro, radio, a station, they herded men out there. There's a station at Balashika? What sort of station? They sent men from Rokossovsky station, and they came back themselves. Do they pick up signals? They can pick up signals from there, right? And the man disappeared as if he'd never even existed. He came out of the darkness and went back into it. Artyom went round, shaking the men who were alive, and tried to persuade the dead to talk, but it was all pointless. In Balashika, he kept repeating to himself so that he wouldn't forget and wouldn't decide that he had imagined the entire conversation. In Balashika, in Balashika, in Balashika, in Balashika. Now there was absolutely no way that Artyom could die. Now he had to crawl out from under these people, find the way out of this concrete womb and be reborn, patch up all the holes in himself and walk or crawl to this fucking promised land of Balashika, no matter who or what be there. He got up again and grabbed hold of a tunnel liner as if it was his mother's hand. Schiller Station had been cut off. The Reds were at Kuznetsky Most. They probably weren't on their way here yet because they'd heard the tunnel get blown up, but he couldn't go to them. He remembered that opening in the wall. Maybe it was some kind of foot passage between the lines. He hopped along, feeling his way, skipped inside. Rats scattered, squealing. If only he was a rat. A rat wouldn't get lost, even with its eyes put out. A breath of air. His shaggy hair stirred on his head, as if Sasha's fingers had combed it. He looked up with his sightless wall eyes. Another breath of air, gentle and playful, like a mother blowing into a baby's face. He grabbed at the darkness with his fingers, broke his nails on concrete, and felt metal, a rung, and another rung, a ladder in a shaft, a ventilation shaft running upwards. The draft came from up there, from the surface. Hey! He shouted. Hey! You over there! All of you! This way! There's a way out here! A way up to the surface! A ventilation shaft! We can climb out! Do you hear me, you freaks? We can get to the surface here! The surface! Are you out of your fucking mind? The invisible beast people groaned. Up! Artyom shouted to them. Follow me, you freaks! They were afraid. They didn't believe him. They didn't know that there was wind and rain up there, and you wouldn't die the first time you went up. He had to set them an example. He grasped a rusty metal rung with his curved fingers. The rung fitted into his fingers perfectly. He hopped and pulled up his shattered leg, shifted his grip and pulled himself up. Again, his head was spinning. He kept slipping, losing his grip, but he immediately grabbed the rung again. He didn't feel his shattered leg, his lashed and shredded back, his skinned hands. He scrabbled, hopped, climbed. He glanced down. There was someone following him, so he hadn't wasted his time. Occasionally he stopped for a second and then went on. If he didn't get out now, he'd never get out. How long it had taken didn't matter when he tumbled into a tiny little room, a booth covered with a grating. A door bolted on the inside, a rusty bolt. He finally skinned his hands completely, turned them into a bloody mush, rust mingled with rust, but he defeated it. He opened the door, crawled out on all fours, and turned over onto his back. It was early morning in the world. A copper-red sun was rising. He simply lay on the ground. On the ground, not under the ground. And it wasn't his head that was spinning. It was the whole fucking globe of the earth. Artyom had set it spinning like a top. Someone fell beside him and lay there. Just one person. No one else had climbed up. "Who are you?" Artyom asked him without turning his head, even for his only follower, but smiling blissfully at the pink morning sky through his lowered eyelids. Who the fuck are you, you monster of a man? Lyoka, that's who, was the answer. The broker. What other stupid fucking prick would it be? You used to be a broker, said Artyom, happy to have lived as far as this. But now you'll be the first apostle. And then he switched off.